I thought I knew who I was, until one forgotten piece of paper tore my entire life apart. My name is Olivia Sanders. I'm 25, the kind of person who plays by the rules, who keeps her head down and works hard thinking that eventually, one day, the world, or at least my family, would finally see me. I grew up in a quiet house in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of house where family photos lined the walls, where every shelf told stories of summer vacations, school achievements, and Christmas mornings. Looking back now, I realize how carefully those stories were curated, what was shown, and more importantly, what was left out. For most of my life, I believed I was just ordinary. Nathan was the star, the child who soaked up all the attention. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the girl who didn't make waves. But I thought I belonged. I thought I fit. Until I didn't. It happened on an afternoon I'll never forget. My grandmother had passed away 2 months earlier, and my parents asked me to help clean out her attic. Dusty boxes, faded photographs, the kind of forgotten family relics no one really wanted, but no one dared to throw away. I was sifting through an old cedar chest when I found a manila envelope with my name scribbled on the front. Not Nathan's, mine. I almost left it there, assuming it was something silly like an old birthday card or a school drawing my grandmother had saved. But curiosity pulled me in. I opened it, and in an instant the ground beneath me collapsed. Inside were adoption papers, my adoption papers, signed, sealed, and buried. I remember staring at them, my hands trembling as if I'd touched fire. My birth certificate was there too, but not the one I'd grown up seeing. This one had different names where my parents' names should have been. I kept reading, desperate for some explanation that would make this feel less earth-shattering. There was none. Just cold, legal words spelling out the truth they had kept from me for 25 years. My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. I wasn't their biological child. I wasn't even a Sanders by blood. A flood of memories rushed through me like broken glass-fractured images that now made terrible, perfect sense. The way my mom would sometimes look at me like she was trying to see someone else. The way I'd always been told, "You're strong, Olivia. You don't need as much." The way Nathan got all the stories, his first steps, his first words while mine were always brushed over or answered with, "Oh, you were so quiet as a baby we barely noticed." I had spent years thinking I simply wasn't interesting enough to remember. But maybe they didn't remember because I wasn't theirs to begin with. I slammed the folder shut, my pulse roaring in my ears. I should have gone straight to my parents. I should have demanded answers, but all I could do was sit there, frozen the attic walls, pressing in on me, my whole life unraveling in silence. For the next few days, I walked through the house like a stranger, seeing everything through new eyes. Every photograph, every family story suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I caught myself wondering if I was even in the family videos, or if I had imagined being there at all. The distance I'd always felt, the slight but sharp edge of not quite fitting, wasn't my imagination. It had been real all along. I wanted to hate them. I wanted to scream. But what consumed me most was the crushing question. Why didn't they tell me? Was I a mistake they'd rather forget? Was I supposed to feel grateful just to have been given a place at their table? The betrayal wasn't just that I was adopted. It was that they had chosen to build my life on a lie. They never trusted me with the truth. They never gave me the chance to know where I came from. I thought back to my childhood, the endless moments I spent chasing their approval, thinking if I was just good enough, they would see me. But now I realized I had been sprinting after a finish line that was never meant for me. The night after I found the papers, I sat alone in my room, clutching that envelope as if it might vanish and take the truth with it. I remember whispering to myself, "Who am I really?" The silence answered me. I didn't know. I thought about Nathan, about how he had always been effortlessly loved. I thought about my parents, about whether they ever looked at me and saw a stranger. That's when something in me shifted. The ache of confusion hardened into something sharper, resentment maybe, or something dangerously close to it. I didn't just want to understand the truth, I wanted to confront it. I wanted to know where I came from. I wanted to know why I wasn't enough. And most of all, I wanted to stop feeling like a guest in my own life. I didn't know then that this discovery would ignite a fire inside me that would change everything. All I knew was that the person I thought I was, the obedient daughter, the forgotten sibling, that version of me, was gone. Who I would become next, that was entirely up to me. I used to believe love was something you earned, until I realized some people are born with it and others like me are born begging for scraps. Growing up, I never questioned the way things were. I just assumed that's how families worked. Some kids got more hugs, more attention, more praise. It didn't mean the rest of us were unloved. That's what I told myself over and over. That's what I had to believe. But the truth has a nasty habit of cracking through even the most carefully built walls. It started subtly, like tiny paper cuts that you don't notice until you're bleeding. My brother Nathan. Oh, he was the golden boy. Every school play, every soccer goal, every average report card was met with applause and glowing smiles. When Nathan walked into a room, my parents' faces lit up like Christmas morning. When I walked in, they'd barely glance up. I remember one summer when I was 8. I spent weeks working on a science fair project building this elaborate volcano that actually erupted on cue. I was so proud. I thought this would be the moment they finally saw me. But after the fair, all my mom said was, "Did you thank your teacher?" Meanwhile, Nathan got a trophy for showing up at his soccer tournament, and they threw him a pizza party that night. I sat at the table, quietly eating my slice, trying to swallow the lump in my throat along with the food. But back then, I didn't understand the weight of those moments. I just thought I had to try harder, be better, shine brighter. So I did. I overachieved. Straight A's, lead roles in school plays, volunteering every weekend. And yet, somehow, I was still invisible in their eyes. Nathan could break a window playing ball, and they'd laugh it off. I'd spill a glass of milk, and I'd get a lecture about responsibility. For years, I buried the sting, locking it deep inside. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe I was too sensitive, that maybe they loved me in their own way, and I just hadn't unlocked the secret code yet. But the more I chased their approval, the more I felt like a shadow in my own home. What really broke me was my high school graduation. I had been working 2 part-time jobs to help with my college savings. Nathan, of course, had his tuition fully covered by my parents, no questions asked. They even bought him a car his senior year. Me, I was told, "You're independent. You'll figure it out." I remember standing on that stage, diploma in hand, scanning the crowd for their faces. Nathan was there, of course, front row. I found my parents eventually sitting towards the back, not even clapping when my name was called. After the ceremony, they hugged Nathan first. He wasn't even graduating, and when they finally turned to me, my mom just said, "Well, you always knew how to take care of yourself." That's when something inside me cracked. Not just a hairline fracture, it split wide open. The seeds of resentment that had quietly taken root all those years finally bloomed into something I couldn't ignore. It was more than disappointment. It was rage. It was grief. It was the suffocating realization that I had never truly belonged. I started replaying everything in my head, how Nathan got the biggest slice of cake, how he always got to ride in the front seat, how they defended him even when he was cruel to me. Was I really that hard to love? Was there something wrong with me? I spiraled for weeks pretending I was fine. But every family dinner felt like sitting at a table where my seat had always been temporary. I would watch them laugh, watch the way their eyes softened for Nathan, and I would feel the cold edge of distance cutting into me. I began to wonder if this was more than just favoritism. Why did I feel like the permanent guest in my own family? Why did they never talk about my birth story, my baby pictures, the little things parents cherish? The puzzle pieces were scattered, but I hadn't yet seen the full picture. I started to pull away. I stopped chasing, stopped asking for their attention. I thought maybe if I disappeared a little, they'd notice the empty space I left behind. But they didn't. Life moved on as if my absence meant nothing. The resentment hardened. It wasn't just about Nathan anymore. It was about me, about what I had been denied. I no longer wanted to be seen by them. I wanted to prove that I could outgrow the small space they had offered me. I wanted to be undeniable. I wanted to build a life where they would be the ones on the outside looking in. What I didn't know then was that the truth, the real life-altering truth, was waiting just around the corner. And when I finally uncovered it, everything I had ever felt would make sense. But by then, I would have to decide what I wanted more: their love or my freedom. And that choice, it would change everything. When the foundation of your life crumbles, the betrayal doesn't stop with the truth. It follows you into every memory you thought was safe. After I found the adoption papers, it wasn't just the present that felt shattered. It was my past that suddenly became foreign, almost unrecognizable. The days that followed were heavy. I walked around our house like I was visiting a museum of someone else's life. Every framed photograph, every souvenir, every scribbled note on the refrigerator felt like it belonged to someone else. I'd grown up here. I'd built my childhood in these walls. And yet, all I could see now were the cracks, the moments that never made sense until now. I started to replay everything in my mind, every scene now tinged with betrayal. Like the time I broke my arm when I was 10. I had fallen off my bike, sobbing and bleeding, and I remember how my mother rushed to call my father not to check on me, but because Nathan had scraped his knee earlier that day and she wanted to make sure he was okay. I sat there holding my broken arm while everyone fussed over his Band-Aid. Or the Christmas when I was 12. Nathan got the newest gaming console, the one he'd circled in the catalog weeks before. I got a sweater 2 sizes too big. At the time, I laughed it off, telling myself that maybe they'd mixed up the gifts, or maybe money was tight. But now I wonder if they ever really saw me. The betrayal wasn't just in the grand lies, it was in the little things. The forgotten birthdays, the half-hearted compliments, the way I was always left out of family decisions like my opinion didn't quite carry the same weight. I used to tell myself I was strong enough to handle it. I convinced myself that love looked different for everyone, that some parents just weren't good at showing affection. But after the truth came out, I couldn't stop questioning everything. Were they distant because they knew I wasn't their blood? Did they keep me at arm's length on purpose? Was I ever more than a responsibility to them? One afternoon, I sat in the attic again, surrounded by boxes that smelled like dust and regret. I flipped through old family photo albums, and I noticed something I had never seen before. In so many of the pictures, I was on the edge of the frame. Sometimes blurry, sometimes cut off completely. Nathan was always in the center, arms around him, smiles directed his way. I was just there, present, but not essential. It was like the evidence had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip those photographs to pieces and throw them out the window, but all I could do was sit there, letting the silent betrayal bleed into my bones. I started to remember the comments I had brushed off over the years, distant relatives who would say things like, "Oh, Nathan looks just like his father," but never said who I resembled. The neighbor who once said, "You're lucky they took you in, though," I'd never understood what that meant until now. And most painfully, the way my mother would sometimes pause before calling me her daughter, as if the word got stuck in her throat. Each memory was like reliving a tiny betrayal. And suddenly, the walls of my home no longer felt like they could hold me. I was suffocating in the weight of all the moments I'd excused, all the times I'd swallowed the lump in my throat just to keep the peace. I stopped eating dinner with them. I stopped sitting in the living room during family movie nights. I created distance not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I couldn't bear the pain of pretending I still belonged. But here's the strangest part: what hurt the most wasn't that they'd kept the secret. What gutted me was that even after I found out, even as I grew colder, no one asked me if I was okay. They didn't even notice the shift. I would come home later, and no one called to check on me. I would sit silently at the table, and no one asked why I'd stopped talking. I had become a ghost in my own family, slowly fading, and they didn't seem to care. That's when I realized the betrayal wasn't in the discovery. It had always been there, wrapped in silence and dismissive glances, in the way I had been taught to accept crumbs and call it love. I had spent so much of my life believing I needed to earn their affection. But the truth was, their hearts had never really been open to me in the first place. And now that I knew, I didn't know how to go back to pretending. The girl who once begged for their approval, she was gone. What remained was someone else entirely, someone who no longer wanted their scraps, someone who was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build her own table instead of fighting for a seat at theirs. But first, I had to face the next question: where did I come from? Because the family I thought I belonged to was never truly mine. And I wasn't done searching. Not yet. Once you open the door to the truth, you can't close it again. You either walk through or spend the rest of your life haunted by what's on the other side. After the shock settled like cold cement in my chest, a new feeling crept in: restlessness. It wasn't enough to know I was adopted. I needed to know why. I needed to know who. The people who gave me up, were they still out there? Did they ever think about me? Was I a secret they carried like a scar, or had they simply moved on? The curiosity wasn't gentle. It gnawed at me day and night like an itch I couldn't reach. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I didn't need to know. I had survived this long without the truth, but the more I tried to push it away, the louder the questions became. What if my real family was looking for me? What if I was never unwanted? What if everything I thought I knew about myself was just the surface of a story I hadn't been told? It wasn't just about finding people who shared my blood. It was about finding the missing pieces of myself. I felt like I had spent my whole life building a puzzle only to realize I was using the wrong box cover. The picture I thought I was making didn't exist. The edges didn't line up. And now I was desperate to find the right pieces. I began my search quietly. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't trust them with this part of me anymore. I had questions I didn't think they could answer, at least not honestly. I started with the adoption papers. They didn't reveal much. Just a few names that felt like strangers, and a city I'd never been to: Savannah, Georgia. That's where I started. I took a weekend off work, packed a small bag, and drove to Savannah. As I crossed the state line, I remember thinking how strange it was that my whole life had been lived so close to the city where it began, yet I had never been curious enough to step into it until now. The first stop was the courthouse. I sat in their dusty records room, flipping through old files like I was looking for someone else's story, until I found mine. Birth mother Emma Carson. Birth father unknown. I stared at that name for so long, trying to feel something: recognition, anger, longing, but all I felt was this unbearable ache. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was just hollow. The file didn't tell me why she gave me up. It didn't say whether she had held me, whether she cried, whether she regretted her decision every day since. All it gave me was an address from 25 years ago, a place she probably hadn't lived in for decades. But it was a start. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The house was still there, worn but standing. I parked across the street and just watched for a long time, as if the walls might whisper the answers I needed. Eventually, I knocked. No answer. I left a note with my number, not expecting a call. Part of me was terrified she might actually reach out. I spent the rest of the day combing through public records, social media, anything that might lead me to her. I found a few possibilities: women with the same name scattered across Georgia. But the trail was thin, and I wasn't sure what I'd do if I ever reached the end of it. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. For the first time, I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding. What if she didn't want to be found? What if the story wasn't the one I hoped for? What if I was never the child she missed? What if I was the child she chose to forget? The doubt was suffocating, and yet I couldn't stop, because not knowing was worse. I realized then that this wasn't just about her. It was about me. It was about the hole inside me that no amount of success, no amount of forced belonging could fill. I wasn't searching for her love. I was searching for the story that would help me understand myself. I thought about the life I'd lived, the feeling of always being on the outside, trying to earn my place. Maybe that's why I couldn't let this go. Maybe I believed that if I understood why I was given away, I could finally make peace with why I never felt at home. The next morning, I drove to the last address I found linked to her name. It was a small apartment complex on the edge of the city. I knocked, heart racing, already preparing myself for disappointment. A woman answered. Older gray streaks in her hair, soft lines around her eyes. Not Emma Carson, but she knew her. She moved a few years ago, the woman said, but she comes by sometimes to visit her sister. Try the cafe down the street. She works mornings. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. As I walked back to my car, something in me steadied. I wasn't sure what I would say if I found her. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answers, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't go back to the life I had before I knew the truth. Because once you start searching for yourself, you can't just stop halfway. You have to see it through, even if it changes everything. There's a unique kind of loneliness that comes from sitting at your own family's table and realizing you were never really invited. Even after I started searching for my biological mother, I still had to come home every day to the life I had always known, the one where I was Olivia Sanders, the adopted daughter no one had cared to tell the truth. But now I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel it. Everything around me screamed that I didn't fit, that maybe I had never fit. And the cruelest part, I had spent years blaming myself for that. You see, being the adopted one in a family like mine, it wasn't a label anyone ever said out loud. It didn't have to be. It was in the pauses, the glances, the way people introduced me. This is Nathan's sister Olivia. Not, this is our daughter. Just Nathan's sister. The afterthought. I used to think I was just being sensitive, that maybe I was reading too much into it. But now I realized I had always been quietly placed on the outside of the circle. The distance wasn't new, it had always been there, like a line drawn in the sand that I kept trying to cross. Every family gathering reminded me of it. Nathan was always the center of every story, every question, every laugh. The golden child effortlessly shining. Me, I was the reliable one, the one who could take care of herself, the one who didn't need much, the invisible one. It hurt in the small, everyday moments. Like when my mother would cook Nathan's favorite meal, even when he wasn't home, but never seemed to remember what I liked. Like when they would call him every day when he moved out, but weeks would pass without them checking in on me. I started to notice how people in our extended family treated me too. At reunions, they would gush over how much Nathan looked like Dad. He's a spitting image of him, they'd say, patting him on the back, eyes sparkling with pride. When they looked at me, there was always that brief flicker, like they were searching for something familiar in my face, but coming up empty. I didn't carry anyone's eyes. I didn't share anyone's smile. The bloodline didn't flow through me, and even though no one said it, I felt it in my bones. I was the outsider in my own family. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from always trying to earn your seat. I bent over backwards for years, desperate to be noticed, to be enough. But no matter what I achieved, it never seemed to tip the scale. I graduated college with honors. No one came to the ceremony. Nathan finished a 2-week leadership course at his job. My parents threw him a party. They told me it was just timing, that they were busy, but by then, I'd stopped believing their excuses. It wasn't just about who got more, it was about who was wanted. And deep down, I knew I was the family's quiet obligation, something they had signed up for, but never fully embraced. What stung the most was how they always used the word ours when talking about Nathan. Our boy, our pride. But when it came to me, it was always Olivia will figure it out. No possessive words, no protective arms. Just distance, just polite walls. The older I got, the more I realized how deeply this had shaped me. I struggled to build close friendships, always afraid I was temporary, easily replaceable. I second-guessed every compliment, every act of kindness, convinced that love was something I had to earn through perfection. And I carried that weight like a second skin. It didn't matter how successful I became. I could have built empires, climbed mountains, and it still wouldn't have changed the fact that in their eyes I would always be the adopted one. The other. The exception. That label followed me everywhere. It whispered in the quiet moments. It screamed in the silences. But the truth is, it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about how I had allowed their neglect to define me. I had spent so long measuring my worth by the scraps of affection they offered that I forgot I could set the standard for how I wanted to be treated. I realized something during one particularly empty family dinner. Nathan was going on about a promotion. My parents hung on his every word. I sat there poking at my plate, waiting for someone to ask about my day. No one did. And in that moment, I stopped waiting. I stopped trying to squeeze myself into a space that was never built for me. I stopped hoping for their attention. I stopped needing their validation. The weight of being the other didn't magically disappear, but I finally started to set it down piece by piece. They may have seen me as the outsider, but I was beginning to see myself as the author of my own story, the builder of my own belonging. And I realized I could choose to carry the weight they handed me, or I could choose to walk away from it. I wasn't there yet, but for the first time I could feel myself moving toward something more, something I would build on my own terms. Because I was done begging for a seat, I was ready to build my own table. Sometimes the loudest rebellion is the one you never announce, the quiet decision to outgrow the small space they built for you. For most of my life, I thought rebellion looked like shouting matches, slammed doors, ultimatums. I thought it meant calling people out, burning bridges, breaking things apart. But when the years of neglect finally settled into something sharp inside me, I didn't explode. I simply stopped chasing. I began my rebellion in silence. It wasn't about proving a point to them anymore. It was about proving something to myself. I was done begging for crumbs of affection, done shrinking myself to fit into their carefully drawn lines. I started to pull away, not with drama, but with quiet decisions they didn't even notice. I stopped coming home for every family gathering. I stopped reaching out to check on them first. I stopped pretending to laugh at the jokes that left me cold. I didn't need to fight them to walk away. I just needed to stop showing up for the role they had cast me in. And I started to build. I threw myself into my career, pushing myself harder than ever, not for their approval, but because I wanted to create something no one could take from me. I enrolled in leadership programs, took on projects that terrified me, pushed through exhaustion because I was finally doing it for me. Success became my silent weapon. Every small victory, every milestone I hit, it was like I was etching my own name in stone, carving out space where no one could ignore me anymore. But I didn't post about it. I didn't announce it. I didn't need their congratulations. The silence became my power. I realized I didn't need to drag Nathan into it either. I used to think I had to beat him at his own game to eclipse him in order to matter. But now I didn't care about Nathan's spotlight. I wanted my own son. Still, the resentment simmered. Even as I pulled away, I would catch myself replaying old conversations, moments where I had been overlooked or dismissed. Sometimes the bitterness would sneak in late at night, curling around my chest like smoke, whispering that maybe I would never fully be free of it. But then I'd remember I was already freer than I had ever been. I was no longer sitting at the edge of their table waiting to be fed. I had stepped away. I was building something new. The quiet distance I created didn't go unnoticed forever. Eventually, my mother started asking why I didn't call as often. My father would leave short, awkward voicemails. I could hear the confusion in their voices, but they never asked the real question. They never asked if I was okay. They never asked why I'd gone silent. Maybe they didn't want to hear the answer. The truth is, by the time they noticed my absence, I was already too far gone to turn back. I stopped spending holidays with them. I booked solo trips instead, places I had always wanted to see but never felt allowed to go. I spent Thanksgiving hiking alone in the mountains, Christmas, wandering through small coastal towns New Year's Eve under a sky of unfamiliar stars. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if it was just in the quiet company of myself. But freedom is complicated. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or a grand sense of arrival. It's slow. It's subtle. Sometimes it feels like loneliness, sometimes like peace, and often it's both. There were moments I still longed for their recognition. I would picture my mother calling to say she was proud of me, my father asking to hear about my latest project. I imagined them showing up to a speaking event, sitting in the front row just once. But those moments always passed, because I knew now I was no longer living for them. My silent revolt became a quiet promise to myself I would build a life so full, so undeniable that I no longer cared who clapped for me. I would create a home that didn't carry the weight of being second best. I would stop chasing people who were perfectly content to let me go. The distance between us became my sanctuary, not my punishment. It's funny when you stop begging, you realize how much you've been offering. You realize you've been the one holding the door open, sending the messages, making the effort. You see just how much you were carrying that was never yours to bear. And when you finally set it all down, the silence isn't empty. It's clean. It's yours. My family still doesn't fully understand why I drifted away. I don't think they ever will, but I don't need them to understand. I don't need their version of love anymore. The girl who once sat quietly waiting to be chosen, she's gone. In her place is someone who chooses herself every single day. And in the soft quiet of that choice, I've found a freedom louder than any rebellion I could have staged. The scariest part about revenge isn't what you might do to them, it's what you might lose in yourself along the way. When I first discovered the truth that I was adopted, that I had spent my whole life chasing a family that never fully embraced me, I told myself I was above revenge. I told myself I just wanted peace, closure, a chance to build a life on my own terms. But the longer I sat with the weight of everything they had done, the favoritism, the lies, the quiet rejection, the more a darker thought began to creep in. What if they deserved to feel what I had felt? What if they needed to taste what it was like to be overlooked, ignored, forgotten? The idea started small. I didn't notice it at first. It lived in the sharp remarks I never said and the silent victories I kept to myself. But slowly it began to grow. I stopped wanting their love. I started wanting their regret. And that scared me, because I could feel it changing me, this quiet hunger for justice, for something that looked dangerously like payback. I told myself it would be harmless at first. I would simply stop correcting people when they assumed Nathan wasn't the only child. When old family friends asked how we were, I would casually let it slip that I hadn't heard from them in a while, watching their faces twist in confusion. I started pulling away from family milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, Nathan's big promotion party. I skipped them all. I wanted them to notice the empty chair, to feel the hole I left behind. But the truth is, they didn't react the way I imagined. They didn't chase me. They didn't beg me to come back. They moved on, and that stung in a way I didn't expect. The temptation to escalate came quickly after that. I caught myself daydreaming about public success. I wanted to outshine Nathan in ways they couldn't ignore. I wanted to build a life so impressive that strangers would ask my parents, "Aren't you Olivia's family?" and they would be forced to swallow the shame of what they had lost. I fantasized about confronting them one day, laying out all the ways they had failed me, watching their faces crumble under the weight of their own guilt. But every time I stood at the edge of those thoughts, I hesitated. Because underneath the craving for revenge, I knew what I really wanted. I wanted to matter to them. I wanted their acknowledgement, their validation, their love. And that realization hurt more than anything else. Because if I truly didn't care, I wouldn't have wanted revenge at all. I would have let them go without a second thought. That was the hardest pill to swallow, that somewhere deep inside me, I still wanted them to choose me. There was one night that forced me to confront what I was becoming. I was at an awards ceremony for a leadership project I'd spearheaded. It was a big moment, a room full of people clapping for me, finally seeing me. And as I walked off stage, do you know who I instinctively looked for? My parents, Nathan. But they weren't there. I hadn't even invited them. I didn't want them there. Or at least that's what I told myself. Yet a part of me still longed for their faces in that crowd, still ached for their pride. It was a sobering moment, because revenge might have given me temporary satisfaction, but it wouldn't have filled the hollow parts of me that were still waiting to be loved by them. And maybe they never would. I started to question the cost of chasing revenge. I had built so much independent success, new friendships that actually saw me for who I was. Did I really want to trade that for the fleeting satisfaction of making them hurt? Would I really be free if I was still living in reaction to them? The temptation didn't go away overnight. It lingered, especially in the quiet moments when old wounds flared. But I slowly began to realize that revenge would only tie me to them in ways I was finally starting to escape. If I wanted to be free, truly free, I had to let go, not because they deserved peace, but because I did. I could have chosen a louder path. I could have made sure they felt the sting of losing me, but I chose something else. I chose to keep building my life without them. I chose to make my happiness so undeniable that their absence wouldn't matter. I chose to step out of their shadow not by dragging them down, but by rising so far they couldn't reach me. That was my revenge, and that was enough. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is living well without needing their permission, their applause, or their regret. And the day I stopped wanting them to suffer was the day I finally started to heal. There comes a moment when you realize peace isn't something you find, it's something you choose. For a long time, I thought my story would end with revenge. I thought I would finally confront my family, unload years of buried pain, and watch them crumble beneath the weight of their guilt. But life rarely gives us the cinematic endings we imagine. What I didn't see coming was that somewhere along the way, the need for revenge began to fade. It didn't disappear overnight. It slipped away in quiet moments on long drives in empty cafes in the mornings, when I woke up realizing I hadn't thought about them for days. The further I walked into the life I was building for myself, the smaller their power over me became. Still, part of me wasn't sure I could fully let it go. I had carried the weight of their rejection for so long it had become a part of me like scar tissue I no longer noticed. I didn't know who I would be without it. But life has a way of forcing your hand. It happened on a rainy Thursday when I got a call I never expected. My father was in the hospital stroke. Nathan called me, his voice tight, unsure if I would even answer. "We don't know if he's going to make it," he said. Mom's asking for you." It should have been a moment of vindication, a chance to confront them, to finally say everything I had rehearsed in my mind for years. But instead, I just felt numb. I didn't rush to the hospital. I sat with the decision for hours, turning it over like a stone in my hand. Part of me thought, why should I go after everything? After all the years they overlooked me, pushed me aside, made me feel like a guest in my own family. But another part of me wondered if carrying that anger any longer would only keep me trapped. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I knew that. But maybe I owed myself peace. So I went. Walking into that sterile hospital room, seeing my father hooked up to machines, it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt human. He looked smaller than I remembered, his strength drained, his arrogance gone. My mother sat at his side, her face lined with exhaustion. When she saw me, her shoulders collapsed in relief, but her eyes were hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to want me there. We didn't talk about the past. Not that day. Not in that room. Sometimes the words that should be said just hang in the air, too heavy to lift. I sat with them. I held my father's hand. I didn't do it for him. I did it because I needed to prove to myself that I could choose compassion without choosing to forget. That was the beginning of my peace. It didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in learning to speak to them without the sharp edge of resentment, in realizing I could show up for the moments I chose, not because I owed them, but because I decided I wanted to. The past didn't erase itself. I still remembered the distance, the favoritism, the years I spent aching to be seen. But I no longer let those memories decide how I moved forward. I drew boundaries. I didn't let them back in completely. I didn't suddenly become the doting daughter they had once expected me to be, but I allowed them to meet me where I was now. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped needing their approval. My peace came when I realized I didn't have to win. I didn't have to outshine Nathan. I didn't have to force them to understand. I just had to let go. Let go of the version of my family I had begged for. Let go of the girl who thought her worth was something to be earned from them. Let go of the desire to be the loudest story in their lives. Instead, I became the loudest story in mine. I kept building my life, a life that no longer revolved around who sat at my family table. I found love in places I never expected. I built friendships that felt like home. I chose people who chose me back without hesitation, and little by little, the bitterness that once fueled me lost its grip. Forgiveness wasn't about saying, what happened was okay. It was about setting myself free from it. Peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about refusing to keep bleeding for old wounds. In the end, I didn't burn the bridge. I didn't need to. I simply crossed it and kept walking. And as I moved further into the life I had chosen for myself, the weight I had carried for so long grew lighter until I could barely feel it at all. That's the quiet truth no one tells you about stories like mine. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is no revenge at all. Sometimes the real victory is peace. And I chose it. I chose me. For years, I thought my story was about loss, about being abandoned, about being less, about living in the shadow of someone who would always be more. But somewhere along this painful, twisting journey, I've realized something life-changing. This story was never about what I lost. It was about what I found. If I could speak to the person I used to be, the girl who sat quietly at family dinners, who begged silently for a seat at the table, I would tell her something I wish I'd known sooner. You don't need to be chosen to belong. You don't need someone else's approval to be worthy. For the longest time, I tied my value to the people who withheld their love. I thought that if I could just do enough, be enough, shine enough, they would finally see me. But life has taught me a painful and freeing truth. Sometimes the people we crave love from the most are simply not capable of giving it in the way we need. And that is not our fault. And it is not our burden to carry forever. There's a cost to building your entire self around someone else's validation. You become trapped in their silence. You start to mistake their indifference for a reflection of who you are, instead of seeing it for what it is, a limitation within them, not a flaw within you. I spent so much of my life trying to earn a place in a family that always kept me just outside the circle. I missed opportunities to love myself, to find joy, to build real, authentic connections because I was too busy running after people who never turned around. If you are walking through something like this, if you feel like the outsider, like you've been labeled the other in your own family, please hear me when I say, you don't have to chase love. You don't have to win it like a prize. You are already enough. The most powerful choice I ever made was to stop fighting for their attention and start building my own peace. I learned to create my own space, my own joy, my own belonging. And what surprised me was that the more I let go of needing them to see me, the more I began to truly see myself. Sometimes life presents us with a choice: stay in the cycle of resentment and anger, or step away and build something healthier, something freer. And here's the hardest part: letting go doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you excuse the hurt. It means you choose to stop letting the hurt define you. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you give for them. It's something you give yourself so you can walk forward without dragging a lifetime of bitterness behind you. I don't regret walking away from that fight. I don't regret choosing my own happiness over proving my worth to people who were never prepared to see it. In fact, walking away was how I finally won. My life isn't perfect. There are still moments when the old ache surfaces. Moments when I wish my family had been different, when I wish I had the storybook childhood I thought I was supposed to have. But those moments pass quickly now because I've built something stronger than those old stories. I've built a life where I am seen, where I am valued, where I am loved. Not because I fought for it, but because I chose it. If I've learned anything, it's this: you don't need to be in someone else's story to write your own. You can be the main character in your life. You can walk away from the table where you're only ever served crumbs. You can build your own table. Invite people who bring love without conditions, and finally find the peace you've been searching for. I thought I was searching for my biological family to find out who I was, but really I found that answer in myself. I chose peace, and I would choose it again. And maybe, just maybe, you can too.